Welcome to the Connected Campus podcast, where we explore the ways that diverse professionals are working every day to optimize their efforts to recruit, retain, and graduate their students.
I'm very excited for our conversation today in our continuing series of interviews with higher ed IT leaders from across the country with multitudes of diverse backgrounds and perspectives. So I think this one will be especially exciting just with the background and things that our guest is involved in. But I'll let you quickly cover kind of the elevator pitch of how you might kind of summarize all the really cool things that you do. But so, Balam, if you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll get to the rest of the questions that I have for us.
Of course, Dustin, and it's a real pleasure to meet you. I know we've been trying to set this up for a while, so happy to finally be able to get together. I am Balam-Kuk Solís. I am the Associate VP for Technology Innovation at Texas State University. Hard to summarize all that I do, but I think in a few words, I can tell you that my passion is to really empower people to use technology to hit whatever goals they have on their job and on their professional development and in their lives, to really be an agent of change and an agent of support and an agent of advocacy, especially for underrepresented groups in the IT sector.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's just been so much more focus on that where like I think we're at that point of sort of maturity and just sort of like the technology space of how it's kind of impacted so many aspects of our lives that we still have a lot of work to be done in terms of closing those digital equity gaps, both in sort of just like how people use it on a day-to-day basis, but then I think like the educational side as well, like empowering people to be able to pursue various credentials or different things. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm sure all the different things, in particular will kind of come up throughout our conversation today. So we'll try to just honor as many of them as we can to kind of just give a little shout out here. But so, we'll start with kind of a very broad question. I think that kind of gets to obviously that work that you're so passionate about and do is like digital transformation. That's sort of the buzzword, the thing that everybody is kind of grappling with and interfacing with in higher ed right now. How do you see digital transformation playing out right now on your campus?
It's an interesting question, primarily because I approach digital transformation from probably a non traditional perspective. To me, digitally transforming the campus does not mean just to create greater efficiencies through technology in terms of services and business processes. But I think it's also, for me at least, critical to focus on how are we transforming the student experience, not again in just providing more efficient ways for students to take care of the business end of being a student, things like paying fees or more efficiently getting transcripts or so forth, but to actually dig deeper and start looking at how we transform the campus in terms of its offerings and what we can bring to the students that will make them digitally enabled workers. And especially, how do we approach that specific problem from a perspective of not a lot of our students necessarily understand the criticality of them being involved in the digital ecosystem, especially not as consumers, but to borrow a phrase and change its meaning, as influencers. And in that space, I'm talking about uh, positioning themselves to influence how digital services and technologies are deployed in the world in a way that is mindful of the variety of people that those technologies touch and the variety of people that need to have an input in the way those technologies uh, will be used and will either facilitate or help serve problems that are very particular to different groups.
Yeah, I do think that's really, really powerful because it's like, maybe sometimes like more emphasis is put, or, maybe it's like emphasis is only put on that sort of like kind of, student satisfaction piece of like, yeah, we want everything to be convenient and efficient and all of that. It's like, yes. And like you'd want to try to take advantage of sort of learning opportunities of, like you said, like decision making processes of, what tools are we using or aren't we using? How do we train people on certain tools and not assume maybe they know how to use them? Or like, um, yeah, just even if you're like creating something new in any field, obviously it's probably going to use technology, and the design and kind of architecture of it needs to be, uh, inclusive and sort of mindful of, uh, all the various kind of stakeholders that might be sort of interacting with it. So I guess to follow up on that question, I guess, do you see what you're doing kind of purely existing in sort of the extracurricular space, or do you see like, are you collaborating with like faculty members or anything in terms of like, um, those sort of like learning opportunities, and like if it's maybe just like you're being consultative to folks who are teaching or guest speakers. I don't know. I'm just trying to see, I guess, maybe how much of what you're trying to do in that space of educating people, about digital equity gaps or anything else, or inclusive design, or anything like that. Is that all kind of extracurricular as you see it, or sort of in the classroom?
It occupies really all the spaces that you have talked about. But one of the things that I'm really passionate about is not just talking the talk, but helping walk the walk. Um, and so I have been in collaboration. So one of the things we didn't mention, I guess, is I work at Texas State University, which is a Hispanic serving institution that has an enrollment of about 38,000 students, and we are a minority majority institution. Um, in in this space that I work in, I have collaborated with a number of our different organizations on campus. And to be more specific about the areas I'm concentrating on is no code platforms, and now also moving into AI. And the reason I'm focusing on no code platforms is really because one of the things that people have been really zeroing in on how to create an inclusive environment has been to create coding camps, coding programs that engage students at a very young age, elementary school. Great example of that, and great success uh, comes from code.org. Really powerful group. At the same time, it's hard to think about coding when you haven't had any experience to any kind of development. So a couple of years ago, I started seeing no code platforms as this low barrier, low threat perception on ramp into becoming a citizen developer, if you wish. A lot of the conversation around that has been more around creating enterprise level efficiencies for small teams. I took this opportunity to move things into uh, how do we bring students into the space to start allowing themselves to see themselves as digital producers and digitally empowered people. So my programs did start in the non-curricular space, um, but it helped me provide a platform through my collaboration with these amazing partners to be able to talk about the success we've had. So at this point, several things have happened in terms of students. I've been guest lecturing in places such as classes that teach agile development but don't have a tool set to where the students don't have a tool set to rapidly develop projects because they don't have the coding experience. And just like this last summer, I worked with the Texas State Owls program, which focuses primarily on adult learners who want to reskill and upskill. And we did our offering now as part of for credit offering. So it's been a journey that basically has been created around seizing opportunities as they present themselves.
Yeah, and that's really great to hear. Yeah, that it is just sort of across the board, taking kind of any venue and kind of modality and opportunity you can to introduce, yeah, something like no code platforms where obviously like coding and everything like that, they're all just sort of tools to produce some sort of outcome, or like something that will impact people's lives. So if it's like, oh, how what if we could, even with like boot camps that were sort of condensing things down into a very short amount of time, it's like, what if we could make that even shorter? That basically it's just kind of like, here, use this to make something to better people's lives or something, and
Mhm.
that is really, really powerful, especially if these are people that are coming from underrepresented backgrounds who are pursuing careers or any sort of opportunities that are going to be more gainful employment to kind of uplift their lives and everything. Is just like really kind of accelerating the outcomes and the goals that like any of us would have for people that are
Mhm.
pursuing these careers in tech or anything else. It's just yeah, it's really, really exciting to see. And I think that yeah, that it really has really a place in the classroom, working with student organizations and clubs or anything that a student might be sort of getting involved in. You want to be supportive, you and your team. I'm sure, just kind of making yourselves available to advocate for these things. And like you said, not just sort of uh, like, talking the talk, but walking the walk in terms of like, you want to be role models for it and try to have the institution itself probably, kind of reflect those values as much as you can and everything. So, um, and I guess because I kind of want to jump to this other quick, because we're kind of talking about this a lot, and I'll go back to the stuff about your academic background. But you are involved, whether it's founding things yourself, a part of boards or other like committees and things, like all these different organizations that focus on diversity and equity, in digital careers and different things like that. Like, how did you get involved in that, and what makes it such important work for you? Because I think I don't know. I guess it's just like we only have so many hours in the week, but you are being so generous with your time to get involved in all these things. So, like, how did they come about? And I guess like how has that sort of helped to sort of like, because I'm sure it sort of has this sort of like symbiotic kind of play off of like your day to day work impacts that you get involved with these organizations that impacts your day to day work. So, like, I guess just talk a little bit more in depth about all the things that you're involved with.
Yeah, different components associated with this. None of these things are simple. First and foremost, it's my background, right? I'm Latinx. I was born in Guatemala, and I came to the United States as a biology graduate student. That was my passion. Through a series of circumstances, I also loved computers since I was a little kid, but I had a number of generous mentors while I was in Guatemala that really made amazing gestures and offerings to me to allow me to become a coder at that time. When I came to the United States, though, the research group that I was working with ended up not having a whole lot of funding for my research. And so I ended up doing a couple of things. One of them is I had to find a job, so I became a data entry clerk. I was working with mainframes at that time, and um, at the time when actually the first IBM PC came around, and Lotus 123 was the thing. So I started showing people how they could use spreadsheets to do more efficient data entry, but also data consistency checks. And also started building hardware software interfaces to build machines to analyze my data because I didn't have access to expensive bio equipment to do that. And over time, the web came into being as I was finishing my graduate degree and was entering into my postdoc. And I started developing biology content for the web. We had a collaboration with a school in the Rio Grande Valley. Talk about connectivity, and back in those days, this was early '90s. We were running through a partnership with one of the telcos. We were running remote classes to high schools in the Rio Grande Valley from Rice University. So there was this ongoing process of finding how technology could be leveraged in educational uh, spaces. But also, my family has really a strong DNA in terms of giving, no pun intended, with the DNA and the biology part. And at some point, I had the opportunity to jump into the instructional technology, educational technology space. And being in Houston, a lot of my work was centered around empowering teachers in inner city schools to provide better education to the students and to educate themselves at the same time on how to leverage technology in the classroom. But I think the sort of crowning thing at the end was the summer of 2020, when we had all these protests and demonstrations going for equity. And at the time, I was in the process of becoming a citizen, and I felt it was high risk proposition for me to step out into demonstrations. Um, and so, but then I also thought, well, how do I actually, be beyond attending demonstrations, which I think was a very valuable thing for people to do? How can I move into a space where I can do more than raise my voice? I can actually empower people uh, to find a level playing field uh, in this space. So I started learning a lot of things myself, but I also just, a friend of mine called it working out loud, not like working out and screaming, but you just work and you're loud about your work.
Mm.
So I just didn't wait for people to ask. I put myself forward in every space I could where I found there would be a relevant presence, uh, and to have a voice heard.
Well, I guess just seeing, yeah, like the things that you're involved in. I mean, you mentioned like benefiting from kind of the generosity of mentors. So I think it's, just seeing that you're doing that as well, like kind of, how much of a positive impact things like those can have. And I guess just what I'm kind of observing too, just like looking over your LinkedIn, like it is just, robust with all these things you're involved in. Like it feels as though, and so I'll just kind of like bounce this back to you. Like it's kind of taking a very holistic approach. Like you're doing a lot of things obviously that are kind of aimed at an issue, but it's like you can't, oftentimes with how complex and kind of, systemic and uh kind of pervasive these issues have been, like you do kind of have to try to hit it on all fronts. And it feels like whether that's intentional or kind of subconscious or something, like you are sort of trying to give as much of yourself on all fronts to all, like to kind of address digital equity gaps and getting folks into tech careers and everything. I guess is that sort of intentional, I guess, on your side?
Very much so, and it's very observant of you. This all sort of the whole quote unquote strategy came out as a result again of the friend of the working out loud uh, thing. We did a program together that is called Designing Your Life, and through this program, we identified the things that give us life, give us energy, and give us engagement. And out of that, I mean, things that should have been obvious to me, really came to the surface. And one of them was I cared a lot about equity and inclusion. I also tremendously enjoy uh, teaching and empowering people. Uh, in the sort of semesters when I'm teaching, I go to bed thinking about what I can teach my students. I wake up excited about that. And whenever I have an opportunity, because of the interactions in the classrooms or the boot camps, like I said, somebody asks me a question about something I don't know. It's super exciting to get to the point of um, learning, so I can share it back with them. But then, like I said, there are all these other forums, all these other spaces, being part of advisory committees, being part of mentoring groups, and so forth. All of these things are done intentionally as part of this, new life design that I have engaged in. Um, I hope you can hear how much I'm, excited about just being able to share this with you. But I think it's really important for those of us in these underserved groups to do our part to open those doors more widely and to lend a hand to people to make it through those doors and to make sure that we are heard whatever we can.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I mean, and it's just, kudos to you for again just making so much of yourself available in all these different ways. And I think, yeah, I mean, it's really inspiring to see. I think, yeah, the folks who are like yourself, just living out your value, like as you're kind of going through that design your life and really being able to like, okay, let me really put a fine point on these things and then kind of parlay that into either pursuing or at least even like kind of accepting maybe what was kind of just available or kind of coming your way, or however any of those kind of things came about. But um I do want to mention too, or kind of ask you, you had mentioned it briefly of your academic background in biology, and I guess the sort of through line that technology had that sort of eventually led you to where you are now. But you obviously spent time gaining these credentials and degrees in biology and everything. I'm curious because it's obviously a question people ask all the time. Is just like, oh, do you even use your like undergrad degree anymore? Anybody in the world kind of thing. So I'm curious for you now, like you have multiple degrees in biology. What do you feel like those degrees give you today? Like, are there just little morsels or anecdotes or things or advice or experiences that still kind of resonate?
It's what is interesting about the biology part is that it helped me create the sort of journey I'm in on the instructional technology side. It had a big role. Well, having a doctorate, for one thing, is a big deal, right? Even though you may not be obviously applying things related to molecular genetics and evolution in your current role. But the skills, the fundamental skills that you learned along the way, whether there's skills such as persistence and focus and whatnot, or things like logical thinking and structures and all these kinds of skills really transfer across multiple spaces that are not necessarily natural sciences. But in the early days, they were also really important because one of the early populations that I worked with, when we were teaching these kids in the Rio Grande Valley and later in other projects, I was working with science teachers in elementary and high school education. And every time that we talked about how do we bring together technology and subject matter into a space, it obviously helps a lot if you have somebody who understands the subject matter. And it was particularly important with some of these science teachers because they themselves had not been trained as scientists, and yet they were being asked to teach subject matters that they were unfamiliar with. Um, so part of what I did at that point with fantastic team at Rice University was create this thing we call the electronic community of teachers. This was a very early, again, late 90s, 2000s when things like Discord and all these other things didn't exist. And we had a tremendously successful community of teachers where both technology and science instruction were part of our daily activities. We ended up training about 5,000 teachers. No, sorry, 2,000 teachers. Correction, during our engagement with one of the country's largest school districts.
Yeah, I mean that's just like really cool because I think it, from what you're saying, it's almost like how people who are like in the military or something, they might have like done that and then they just go off and do whatever they want. But it's like, yeah, like having this like experience where it's like, discipline and organization and like if you can always just find those sort of through line of skills that can be transferred into anything you do, it's just like, you know, important because yeah, like anymore. It's just that the act of going to college and immersing yourself in the environment and taking advantage of all these things, it could be like you might never do that exact thing again or use like that exact concept that you learned in your program ever again. But just the persistence and the critical thinking, all those kind of things. It's like, yeah, that's like just kind of a byproduct of it naturally, no matter what. If you go through that experience, you're going to grow and learn in that way and just be able to pursue, wherever life will take you or whatever, however your goals and dreams might change over time. But so that's really awesome. And I think yeah, like it is that idea that like the things that you did then, like it all kind of was like, well, this led to this. Like, there's just kind of this like domino effect of things that you did that eventually led you to be working in higher education as a sort of IT leader and everything. But it's like, yeah, that's where it started. Like, if I didn't do that, then I
Mhm.
wouldn't be here. Like, so that was an important part, even though you're not a like biology professor or something. Like, it's it was an important part of the whole journey. So,
I've
um,
I've always said that everybody should learn algebra, including people like, example I used to give people is if you're going to be a movie maker, algebra is going to be tremendously useful, not because you're going to be necessarily using, equations in creating a story or creating a movie, but it's going to help you think about structure and sequence and patterns and all these kinds of things that might intuitively not seem to make sense. But if you if you can create something like an Excel function, you can be a movie maker in the sense of you can develop a project plan and understand how to move along in a sequence of events to get to a final goal.
Yeah. Or yeah, like I was just thinking where it's like, yeah, like pay attention in like geometry and angles and everything because of like lighting and where you're put like that's probably like something that maybe some people are very salient of and others maybe not, but just like yeah, like how stuff like that can just be kind of baked in and informing your perspective where it's like, man, you're really good like principled of photography, making movies and stuff. But it's like, well, it's actually because I really liked, yeah, like math class in high school and it's yeah, sequencing and patterns and whatever else. So yeah, that's a good one. Well, we will finish up here. So we'll certainly have ways to connect with you and then the work that you do in the description for this episode. But we ask everybody at the end of each episode, what does a connected campus look and or feel like to you? So take that question as you will.
Yeah, great question. Again, probably a non-traditional answer, but obviously it does start with a very powerful infrastructure that supports connectivity in a frictionless way across the whole space. In higher ed, though, the interesting question, and because of the diversity of campus structures that we need to think beyond that. Today's the connected campus is not just whatever is within the hedges or the walls of the university. How do we reach out with basic infrastructure across the whole population that we serve? And we have places like Texas State and here in the hill country of Texas, we have a lot of remote students, and I have seen how difficult it has been for some of them to keep up remotely with teaching and learning. But that's sort of like the very basic foundation. The connected campus has also a lot to do with what kind of minimum digital footprint does a student need to have, whether they're on campus or especially away from campus, to really take advantage of modern teaching and learning. Uh, a lot of people think about remote learning from a watching a person lecture and somebody sitting there maybe with a notepad and taking notes. Um, I'll just use myself as an example. I very much teach as let's do together, let's build together, let's approach this from a project based learning environment. That translates, especially for remote learners, into a very different experience. They need to have two monitors, they need to have high speed internet. Uh, our understanding of what that high speed connectivity means is very different for very different people. But then again, those are all infrastructure concepts. How do we layer on top of that the actual digital services and tool sets that everybody needs? Of course, we're going to have students being able to, you know, make payments online and sign up for classes online and whatnot. But are all the other tools that they could be using available to them in a connected way? I want to go back to the no code development environment because that's one of the things that has been fundamental to our institution. We have licensed no code development tools across the whole institution. Um, that means that every student, every staff member, every faculty member have access to these revolutionary tool sets, and they can use them in whatever way is useful to them, right? So connected means access across every single layer of services and tools that uh, our stakeholders need to have, um, and with minimum friction.
Yeah, I like that. Access with minimum friction is, I think, a good headline here. And just, yeah, I mean, the fact that we just all the things that you're sort of kind of encompassing is very holistic. But that it's like it's hardware, it's software, and you know everything in between. Where it's like you would think about, yeah, like that connectivity of having high speed internet. It's like, well, you're probably going to need like maybe a hotspot or something, like some piece of hardware to then access that wireless, like, connectivity or whatever, like, and, all the various digital tools and everything. Um, so yeah, so it's good to be really mindful. And I think something that was very impressed to see and hope people sort of continue to kind of remember and take heart in is like what people through kind of sheer willpower and just like commitment were able to achieve during the pandemic to sort of close those equity gaps. It's like, see, okay, let's like remember that and keep that sort of spirit alive to keep trying to strive to kind of keep up with whatever the sort of needs of the moment are, because I think it just really showed how much we were kind of possible of accomplishing in this space. So and yeah, I feel like we're kind of bookending, like, ending as we began with sort of just the topics and the digital, equity and everything. So yeah, I'm just so grateful for you to share all that you did, hang out for a bit, and obviously just for all the great work that you do with all the things that you're involved in. And yeah, just really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Dustin. It's just been a pleasure. I really enjoy doing these kinds of things because, again, it's a new avenue for us to talk about these issues that are so critical to our future generations, and important to keep in mind the whole issue of what does digital transformation really mean, and it's not just bringing tools to the business processes, but creating an inclusive and equitable space to that's accessible to all of our stakeholders. And in higher ed, it is our students that we are accountable to. Uh, so, uh, deeply grateful for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to the Connected Campus. Please leave a 5-star review for the show and share it so others can discover us. Make sure to also subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Connected Campus.